Tonight, you arrive in mid-14th-century France under a fragile truce in the 100 Years' War, an English pilgrim keeping your vow on the road to Saint-Martin at Tours, where bell towers watch the Loire and rumours drift along the same paths that lead toward the papal court at Avignon. If you enjoy this gentle journey, please consider subscribing. It helps us craft more quiet histories. Now take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let mist on river water, soft hooves in muddy lanes, and candlelight in stone cloisters ease you toward rest as you walk quietly between shrine and guesthouse, where faith, letters, and secrets travel by night. You walk a damp, rutted road within earshot of Tours, the track a ribbon of mud where cartwheels have bitten deep, and rain has made a sheen that reflects the late light. A bell from a small priory counts the hours in a steady measure, and you keep time with it, staff to mud, breath easing as none yields toward vespers. Your vow is simple and stubborn. When an autumn fever pressed your chest until you counted every gasp, you promised St. Martin a journey and a taper if you rose from that bed. The saint's charity calls to you, the story of the soldier who cut his cloak in two to share with the shivering beggar, and then saw Christ wrapped in that half-cloak in a dream. So you have chosen his shrine and his town, even as you travel the territory of a rival crown. You keep to yourself on the road, lowering your eyes when riders pass, and lifting them to the waymarks that matter, the wooden cross at a parish boundary, and the stone that names the next village. You move under a truce that calms the road without making it friendly, and you breathe as steadily as the bell, measuring your steps toward Tours and the shelter of a saint. Pilgrimage in this country carries many motives, and you fit among them like a pebble among pebbles in a riverbed. Vows murmured in storms at sea, bargains struck during sieges, promises made in sick rooms when a priest whispers the litany of saints. You have seen the signs of it tucked into hats on the road, small lead tin badges, the metal soft and bright where a cloak has rubbed it, likenesses of saints and their stories pinned to felt. For Tours, the favoured token shows a bishop on horseback leaning from the saddle to share his cloak, or sometimes a tiny shield with the city's towers, and you plan to buy one at the basilica and pin it to your scrip, not the scallop that marks Santiago. Hospices keep this world going. Houses of St. Martin and other confraternities gather alms to lay straw, to ladle pottage, to tend feet rubbed sore, and to enter names into books so prayers follow pilgrims farther than their coin can travel. Indulgences add to the draw, especially on the great feasts, Martinmas in November, when the wine is new and the days are short, and the summer feast of the translation of his relics in July. Promises of remission attached to visits, confessions, and the generous distribution of bread. You are not here for a promised tally of days, though you will take that mercy. You are here because your breath returned, and a vow is a thread, once tied, that should not be cut. The road you follow is old in its direction and varied in its surfaces, straight in places where Roman stones still determine the line, and meandering where villages nudged it to one side. This is the Via Turonensis, a recognized path that runs from Paris through Chartres and Tours, and then bears southwest, carrying some who will cross into Spain and continue to Compostela, and others who stop where they vowed to stop. Parish crosses rise at boundaries, weathered into soft corners, and you nod to each as the custom is, touching your hat brim and letting your staff mark the sign in the air. Bridges are blessings offered by the living to help the living. Confraternities of bridge builders mend spans and keep them passable, their labour remembered in small prayers as you cross a plank that does not wobble. Tolls punctuate the way, little shacks where men weigh your goods with their eyes and ask for coin to maintain the road, and river ferries offer the relief of wooden decks and the rhythm of poles pushing against a current. At each stop, papers matter as much as coin, letters of passage with beads of wax impressed by a ring, names and routes written in a clerk's careful hand to show that you travel for pious reasons and under no warrant. South and east of you, beyond the vineyards and the line of the Loire, the papal court rests in Avignon, not in Rome, and its presence reaches even here like a long administrative shadow. The popes settled there in the early years of this century when turmoil in Rome and the closeness of the French crown made the Rhone Valley safer for councils and scribes, and the court grew efficient. Registers copied in a neat chancery hand, petitions sorted, dispensations issued, nuncios dispatched like steady beads on a string. Legates and envoys ride from that city to argue for peace, to mediate between princes who share more cousins than sympathies, and to remind local officials that truce is a grace to be guarded. Letters travel with them, and also ahead of them, sealed with wax, bearing the impressions of signet rings or lead bully for more solemn messages, tied in packets and sometimes carried by those who draw less notice. Merchants, students, pilgrims like you. In taverns you hear that messengers choose the company of pilgrims for precisely that reason, moving in the shelter of piety and numbers, their satchels stitched carefully to keep damp from the script. These letters matter in a way that bread and beds do not, for they can turn a siege to a parley or confirm a safe conduct that keeps swords in scabbards for a season. You move toward Tours with all of that humming beyond your sight, aware that the road bears words as well as feet. The truce that lets you pass is one of those intervals when armies clean their mail and garrisons keep watch with less bitterness, but no less attention. At a small town gate near the river, a sergeant asks your origin, and you answer in the French you have gathered from markets and docks, showing the folded parchment tied with thread, its red wax warmed by your palm so the impression shows plainly. He reads your name and the clerk's Latin phrase that confirms your purpose, nods at the seal of a local prior who vouched that you are bound for St. Martin, and gestures you inward. It is civil, efficient, and without warmth. At an inn where the hostler smells of rushes and smoke, you change English sterling for deniers, tournois, and a few gros, the innkeeper balancing your coins on a little scale and touching a gold noble to a stone to test it before he sighs and counts out the local money. He gives you bread and onions and a place near the hearth, and he keeps the talk to weather and roadwork, not to banners or loyalties. You follow his lead and answer with the names of bridges you have crossed. A Franciscan friar sits with you a while and remarks softly that truces are like the skin on hot milk, there for a moment, easily broken, and then offers a blessing, shifting from his everyday French into the Latin of the office for a sentence or two before returning to the warmth of the fire. Languages braid through your day. You think in English when you pray and in the Anglo-Norman phrases that cling to your trade when you count coin, while the marketplace speaks Middle French in a dozen accents, and the church speaks Latin with a steady rhythm that makes sense even when meaning escapes. Documents make the same sort of braid, your letter of passage with its parish seal, a writ of safe conduct that mentions the truce by name, and a scrap from home folded in your scrip with a wax bead pressed by a family ring. You notice other travellers clutching their own bundles with care, some with ink on their fingers, some with penknives for cutting bread and sealing thread, none eager to speak more than politeness demands. The talk you do hear is of ferries and tolls, of a broken span repaired by a bridge guild downstream, of a shrine gate that closes promptly at sunset, and a steward who counts beds so nobody is turned out after curfew. You are content to fit within that pattern and not disturb it. The road favours those who move like water, finding the lower, quieter channels. When the friar rises, he bids you go with peace, and reminds you that at Tours a poor man is honoured more than a rich one, if he asks in the right spirit, and you tuck that into your thoughts with the next step. By the time the light goes the colour of diluted wine, the Loire runs high under a pale sky, its surface broken by small islands that seem to drift with you, and the air smells of wet stone and fish. A ferry takes you across with a clatter of hooves and the creak of ropes, and the boatman nods to the outline ahead. Towers, roofs, and the broader mass that marks the precinct of St. Martin, where canons keep the office and pilgrims find a bench and a bowl. The garrison at the bridgehead watches in silence, helms glimpsed now and then above the parapet, and a gatekeeper checks the crowded entry with the same quiet questions and the same glance at seals and names. Within the walls, stalls pack up for the night, and you catch the exchange of coins in several standards. Denier's tournois here, a silver grow there, and now and then a clipped sterling that draws a frown, while a clerk chalks tallies on a board. The basilica's lantern looms beyond the roofs, steady as a small cloud caught on a tower, and bells begin their evening summons, drawing the city into a slower cadence. You follow the sound, your staff tapping lightly as you move toward the guesthouse where a bed and a taper await, and where the saint's charity leans over his town like a cloak. You enter the precinct of St. Martin as the daylight thins, and the basilica's broad stones hold a fading warmth beneath your soles. Tours has grown around this shrine for centuries, and the church here is served not by monks, but by canons of a collegiate chapter, men who keep the offices and tend the relics with an ordered rhythm of chant, reading, and quiet administration. Below, in the crypt, the bones of Martin, the late Roman soldier who gave half his cloak to a beggar, draw a river of footsteps every day. Pilgrims come with wax tapers and small coins, leave with badges in thin lead that show the saint dividing his mantle. You have seen such badges on caps and cloaks from Flanders to Gascony, a language of tin that opens doors and proves vows. Around the precinct, lay servants manage guesthouses sorted by status and by sex, a more comfortable hall for nobles and wealthy merchants, plainer dormers for common travellers, and separate quarters for women under a matron's eye. Curfew will come with a bell from a tower, and then the town watch will close the lanes while the cannons' lamps glow behind their screen, and the smell of incense drifts, gentle and steady, into the cool. You descend to the crypt and make your offering with the ritual you have practiced across weeks of road. A knee to the flagstones, a palm to the cold rail, a candle set into a socket already rimmed with wax. The murmur of prayer around you is low and unhurried. A lay brother passes with a basket of spent tapers, his sandals soft as cloth on the stone. At a remove, a man in a travel-stained but fine cloak kneels with one hand resting on a satchel he does not unbuckle. A signet ring catches a little of the candlelight as he crosses himself. You have seen him already at the refectory yard, where noble visitors eat apart, though not lavishly, and where a clerk notes each name and the route of travel for the chapter's records. In these places a stranger is expected to show some token: a pilgrim's badge, a letter of introduction from a parish priest, a safe conduct if he claims business, so that the officers of town and church can know why he has come. You take care to keep to your corner, to offer no cheer, to let your English vowels stay folded under your breath until the prayers are finished. The city beyond the precinct has its own order, and you have learned to notice it as part of keeping yourself untouched by trouble. Tours is held to the king's law, and a royal bailiff and his prévôt keep watch over markets, tolls, and quarrels, while the canon's land stands with a measure of ecclesiastical immunity. The precinct can harbour the hunted for a time, take oaths, record statements, and consult with the bishop's official before releases a man to royal justice. The town watch will cry the hour and shut the gates at nightfall, and those without a hearth or a license to be abroad after curfew must prove a purpose or take shelter where the church allows. A guesthouse porter knows this routine. He will bolt the door at the bell, admit latecomers only by name, and send any brawlers to the chapter's beadle for oath-taking in the morning. You know such customs well enough to navigate them, which is why you keep your badge visible and your satchel open to inspection, with nothing more dangerous than bread, a string of rosary beads, and a needle case. The peace in this truce year is thin as parchment, and everyone watches everyone else a shade too closely. You eat, you drink small ale, you lie on a pallet by the wall, and you let the murmur of the court and the clink of bowls settle your thoughts like falling ash. The sound that wakes you is not a cry, but the creak of the yard gate and a wordless hush, as if men are trying to speak with their mouths closed. In the stable yard, by the wall where the lantern makes a pool of yellow, the nobleman from Aquitaine lies on his side with one hand still not far from where a satchel might have been. The wound is a single, narrow puncture below the ribs, neat as a hole from an awl, the cloth little torn and the blood hardly spread. A lay brother crosses himself. The porter mutters about summoning the bailiff, and one of the canon's beadles holds up a palm for stillness as he looks to the mud on the man's boots. You notice a smear of reddish wax on 2 fingers, and near the hand a strip of narrow ribbon cut cleanly away, its pressed ends showing the impression left by 2 different seals now missing. The mud that cakes the hem of the man's cloak is pale and sandy, not the dark clay of the stable-yard, suggesting a place a little beyond the precinct where the Loire's dust settles on the road. When the bailiff's men arrive, they do so with routine gravity, lanterns held high, questions shaped by long practice. Foreigners are called forward first, and you find yourself at the front of the knot, your English name repeated with a careful mouth by a clerk who scratches in his wax tablet. You show your badge of St. Martin, a small tin figure of the saint cutting his cloak, and the letter from your parish priest attesting to your vow, both held up for the beadle to witness. They ask where your knife is, and you present the long eating blade from your pouch, its edge dull from bread and cheese, and its smear of grease not yet wiped away. A soldier sniffs and grunts, not displeased, not convinced. The bailiff explains, mild but firm, that the precinct can hold you under sanctuary until he consults the chapter. But if no clear evidence comes, the town must not keep an Englishman in dubious safety while the king's truce trembles. He gestures to the ground where a small dagger might have fallen and been retrieved. There is no such blade, and the absence feels like a thought someone has carefully kept out of the lantern light. You stand a little apart and see what the crowd does not wish to see. Two travellers who pull back into the shadow of the guesthouse eaves and make no offer of witness. One calls himself a monk, but wears his habit oddly. The belt knotted not in the manner you have seen among Benedictines or Augustinians, the hem stitched with a coarse hand as if borrowed or bought in haste. The other you recognize from the road, a careful, quiet man who walked a measured pace, always watching the distances ahead and behind, sitting with his back to a wall at inns and keeping his satchel under his knee. Neither comes forward to describe where the Aquitainian ate his supper or with whom he spoke. The beadle begins to take statements in order, and the custom is to swear by relic or by the chapter seal, with those who lie warned of sin and of the secular penalties that follow. In your turn, you speak plainly of your arrival, of your candle, of your pallet by the wall, and of the nobleman's signet ring and close-held satchel, and you see the clerk mark the word satchel with emphasis. In the murmur that follows, the chapter's prior steps from the refectory door and exchanges a low word with the bailiff, a negotiation at the edge of two jurisdictions. The prior reminds the officer that the precinct can keep an accused under the shadow of sanctuary for a short span, long enough to sort witness from rumour. The bailiff reminds the prior that soldiers stationed along the Loire do not love delays when the dead man wears a signet and speaks the langue d'oc of Aquitaine. Someone mentions Avignon in a whisper, and you remember what road rumour has taught you. In these years the Pope sits not in Rome, but on the Rhône, and sealed letters go there by the safest channels men can devise, often under the appearance of humble pilgrimage. A smear of wax on fingers could be nothing, but you have seen couriers soften seals by the warmth of a palm, fold ribbon, press signets in dim corners so that only the final bearer knows the message's true face. The missing small dagger and the pale road dust speak of a meeting a little beyond the yard, not a brawl, but a quiet, quick thing. You are aware, almost calmly, that such awareness can be a noose if spoken at the wrong moment. By the time the bells mark the late office, the bailiff has arranged his terms in measured phrases you can accept. You are to remain within the precinct under the prior's watch, to present yourself twice daily to a beadle, and to offer any memory that might bear on the Aquitainian's last hours. If no clearer account is found within days, the sanctuary will yield you to royal justice, and the soldiers will have their easy culprit, an English pilgrim arriving late with no advocate among Tours folk. You nod and accept the conditions, mindful that an oath, even under pressure, is a thing that binds, and that the canons will hold you to it. In the corner of the yard, the two wary pilgrims have melted into the dormitory door. You mark their faces as you would mark a fork in a river road. Your hope is simple and exacting, to trace the nobleman's final steps along the pilgrim way, from gate to gate, from yard to yard, and to find who walked beside him with a satchel in mind and a dagger hidden from the lanterns. You take a breath, steady as a chant, and prepare to begin where the road dust changes color. You follow the pilgrim road out of Tours, with your cloak pinned close and your eyes on the ruts that every cart and mule has pressed into the earth, retracing the Aquitainians' last days by habit rather than hurry. The truce makes the countryside quieter than war, yet hedges hold watchful faces and villages weigh charity against caution. Memories of the plague, still tender as fields, creep back into cultivation. Wayside chapels stand at crossroads with chipped saints and a little box for alms. And at the town's edge, the old leper house lies half empty, its porches now used to store firewood and brooms, a sign of reduced numbers and careful hopes. You note how bridges come where lay brotherhoods once pledged coin and stone, their plaques weathered, but their toll houses still manned, because a bridge without a keeper is a bridge that starves. Ferries work the Loire and its tributaries with ropes and poles, their skippers reading the current like a psalter, and you mark each landing as a place where a traveller can be counted, questioned, or forgotten. Market days fill the inns and sweep straw from floors by midday. When beds are scarce, you bargain for space on a bench and the right to keep your boots by your head. Along this road, hospitality is a soft discipline, the rule of shared food, a clean basin, and a bed if there is one. And it is within that discipline that those who carry secrets cross unnoticed. At the bridge toll house beyond the priory fields, you find an elderly collector in a sheepskin, his fire a small blue flame in a clay stove, his ledger a tally of chalk notches and memory. He remembers the Aquitainian because the nobleman paid in deniers tournois with a steady hand, then offered an English groat that the collector weighed in his palm and returned, protesting that he could not change so large a foreign piece. In halting French and the phrases you have learned, pour l'amour de Dieu and je suis pèlerin, you ask about companions, and he nods toward the far end of the bridge where the wind comes hard off the water. Two supposed pilgrims kept to the rear, he says, one with a hood drawn deep over his eyes, the other with a staff too new to be more than a prop, the wood bright where it should be worn smooth. He taps the table, remembering how the hooded one spoke little and let the other do the paying, and how the nobleman looked back once as if to judge the distance between them. The collector's mention of the bridge brotherhood that funds the span, merchants' sons and guildsmen who promised candles and repair, gives you the sense of a place where coins, faces, and the rhythms of travel are noticed, and where two shadows clung to a single figure. At a small priory set beside orchards and the low remains of a lazar wall, a hospitaller brother receives you with a wooden cup of thin ale and a folded blanket, and your question is one he answers by rubbing his thumb and forefinger together as if feeling thread. He lent a needle, he says, to a quiet traveller who claimed he must mend a satchel seam immediately, his speech too careful for a man used to begging. When the brother stood near, he caught the warm, sweet edge of wax. You picture seals pressed with signets, cords threaded through slits in folded letters and knotted under a blob that holds an imprint, because royal couriers favour such devices, and so do the papal secretaries at Avignon. Monasteries themselves carry letters as acts of friendship, abbots sending notes with visiting brothers, and merchant companies hire their own messengers to protect account books and contracts, their packets bound with coloured silk. For the traveller to mend a seam in haste, wax at his fingertips, hints at a letter turned into cloth, the common practice of sewing important words into garments or satchels when the road grows uncertain. The brother shrugs toward the guesthouse where pallets line the floor. In a time when numbers are fewer and each stranger matters more, a borrowed needle can say as much as a confession. In a market town inn where the yard smells of onions and damp straw, you trade a small token of St. Martin for a bowl of stew, and supplement the price with a few deniers tournois, because the innkeeper frowns at your English coin and makes a show of biting its edge. He recalls a quarrel not of voices, but of bodies angled away from one another. Two men at the stable door holding folded letters that they split between satchels as a troop of soldiers rode past. Silence can be a shield, the innkeeper mutters, and the motion of dividing the papers struck him as practiced, as if they were used to moving words like chessmen when eyes turned their way. He has seen royal couriers on the King's Road, riders with badges that grant right of way. He has hosted merchant messengers who fold their packets under the mattress. He knows the look of business that pretends to be prayer. He remembers the smell of damp wool and a pair of staffs set against the wall, one shaved smooth with a blade so recently that it still held curls of pale wood, and a hood that never came back even when the fire burned low. You say little of your own trouble, only that your path and theirs ran near, and you leave a groat as a pledge even if he cannot spend it, because trust is a slow currency, and you need the innkeeper's good word to cross the town gate again. By the ferry landing, the Loire lies wide and grey, and the ferryman keeps his pole against the mud like a third leg, watching the water more than the shore. He remembers the Aquitainian showing a safe conduct sealed in red wax, the imprint so fine he dared not name it, though it was not the lily he knows from coin and banner. Safe conducts speak many dialects of authority. What he recalls most clearly is a ring, a falcon stooping on a field, which you know could belong to a Gascon house whose loyalty is bartered between crowns when treaties waver. He speaks of who else crossed that morning, a monk whose cowl sat oddly on his shoulders, too stiff for a man habituated to the cloth, and another pilgrim who did the talking for them both, respectful to the point of rehearsal. As he eyes you, you take from your pouch the little badge of St. Martin, two halves of a cloak engraved in tin, and you tell in simple French and a few Latin words the vow that brings you, so the ferryman can weigh story against sign. To be a pilgrim is to carry permission, you think, a quiet license to pass gates and tolls, and the very trust pinned to your cloak is what a spy or deserter covets when war softens into truce. Your questions, paced and patient, set you within the network that moves letters more quickly than feet alone, and the patterns sharpen as you walk. Kings send mounted couriers with horn and warrant. Merchants hire fleet boys who know back lanes and river fords. Abbots ask visiting friars to carry a folded line to a sister house, and independent riders sell their speed to any who pay. The packets they guard are trussed with ribbon or strong thread, their folds locked to betray tampering, their seals impressed by signet devices kept on chains at belt or strung from the wrist, each mark a name made in wax. When roads grow rough or watchful, a messenger might stitch the folded slips into the hem of a tunic or the lining of a bag, one seam among many, and it is here that the borrowed needle and the scent of wax return to you like candle smoke at matins. Along the way you barter for straw and bread with what words you possess. Pain for bread and pay for bedding, and when the miller's wife laughs kindly at your accent, you answer in the language of coins, counting out small tournois and tucking your stubborn groats deeper in your purse. The mid-century has taught people to listen before they judge, and still their charity carries questions like shadows. By evening, you assemble the trail as a scribe assembles a page, margin notes pointing back to what matters, and the faces form a gentle procession behind your eyes. 2 false pilgrims shadowed the Aquitainian, one a hired courier whose hands knew seals and strings and who kept the speaking part, and another a deserter who cut his hair or hid its lack and wore a monk's cowl to pass checkpoints without scrutiny. The hood drawn low would hide a face known to a garrison or conceal the absence of a proper tonsure, and a staff too new to be honest declares a disguise purchased yesterday rather than earned by miles. Their silence at the inn, their division of letters when soldiers rode past, and the hurried mending of a satchel seam all point toward correspondence, meant for eyes beyond Tours, perhaps for the papal court at Avignon, where seals are weighed like oaths. The nobleman's ring and safe conduct suggest he was trusted enough to carry such things, and dangerous enough to those who wished them still. You set your jaw to the quiet work ahead, knowing that on these roads truth often wears a pilgrim's badge, and falsehood borrows one. You move through Tours with the quiet caution that keeps a vow intact, and you notice how pilgrimage softens the edges of a town even during a truce. In the mid-14th-century, shrines knit Europe together like a net of roads and chapels. St. Martin's resting place draws merchants, peasants, nobles, and the sick, all marked by badges, staffs, and satchels. Pilgrims travel not only to ask for cures or give thanks, but also because the Church recognizes travel under vow as a protected passage, and this protection, though imperfect, often holds even when kings quarrel. Along the Loire's banks, hostels and hospitals founded by canons and lay brothers offer beds and thin broth, and the shrine's guesthouse records travellers by name, trade, and origin, both for charity and for order. Under a fragile truce, soldiers keep to garrisons and toll houses, while spies, on both sides, borrow the anonymity of your grey cloak and staff. The routes are crowded with messages hidden in walking staves and satchels, and the nearer you are to Tours, the truer it becomes that the road serves both prayer and politics. You carry in your mind the weight of Avignon, where the papal court now sits by the Rhône, and with it the habits of its chancery. The popes established themselves there earlier in the century, drawing theologians, notaries, and secretaries into a city of ledgers, seals, and embassies, a place where letters travel with cords and wax and careful hands. Papal and legatine documents often signal their authority through their sealing, sometimes a leaden bulla hung on cords, sometimes rich red wax stamped deep with keys or a cardinal's device, and often accompanied by a smaller counter-seal to guard against tampering. Royal chanceries have their own habits: green wax on cords for solemn charters in France, red wax on parchment tags for many English letters, so a trained eye can often guess a letter's origin without ever lifting a flap. Breaking a seal is more than discourtesy. It is a legal wound against the sender's word, and those who carry such letters walk under a shadow of trust that can be broken by suspicion alone. In a season when truce papers are fresher than last year's harvest, the road to Avignon bears more than prayers, and you understand why a dead nobleman and missing correspondence have unsettled this town. You begin with clothing and earth, because garments remember places when mouths forget. Near the guesthouse, you see the man whose habit rings false. His cowl is cut too shallow, the hood sitting stiff as if tailored from memory rather than rule, and the belt is a simple rope, where a Benedictine would keep a plain leather cincture and a Franciscan would wear a knotted cord. His rosary hangs mismatched, beads of glass and bone strung irregularly, and the crucifix is the sort sold at fairs, not the modest piece a vowed brother might carry. More telling is the hem of his tunic. Tours throws up a chalky dust from its limestone lanes, pale and powdery, but his hem is clotted with darker clay that dries to a cracked slate. Riverbank mud from the Loire's low paths, not the town's streets. His staff shows fresh work, bark pared down with hasty cuts near the grip, and sapwood still pale. A real monk's staff is usually worn smooth by years of use. You mark him in your memory, noting the easy spread of his feet and the way he scans alleys with the soldier's habit of measuring distance, and you pass on without challenge, because silence gathers more than a shout. You observe another traveller whose piety feels staged, the hired courier who kneels quickly and watches the doors more than the altar. He keeps to the nave where the crowd flows and avoids the sacristy, where the canons and their lay brothers inventory chalices, patens, and coffered reliquaries under wax tablets and careful witness. When he lifts his satchel, you see how it sits on his hip, heavy but balanced, and you recall how such bags are made. 2 layers of wool or linen, lined and doubled at the mouth, with seams worked in sturdy running stitches reinforced by backstitch at the corners. Pilgrims often patch the strap attachment with a whip stitch, and an experienced hospitaller can make those repairs at a bench, needle glinting in lamplight, hiding thin packets between lining and face cloth with small regular bites that vanish to the eye. A clever hand may slide parchment into the space between layers, then stitch over the ridge so that only fingertips, not eyes, would detect the lift where thread bites differently. You remember the guesthouse hospitaler's urgency about a repair yesterday, his requests for more light, his search for a stout needle, and you file that beside the courier's aversion to any place where inventories and watchful eyes might catch him idling. You descend to the crypt when the lamps have been trimmed, and a gentle cluster of watchers keep vigil, because the dead have a way of loosening the living tongue, and the quiet shows you what noise conceals. The shrine's heart lies below the stone floor, where iron-grated niches hold bone and cloth, and arms chests sit beneath lampstands, their keys kept by a canon and a lay brother together, so that no one holds both locks. Candles stutter in their pools, and shadow moves like a slow tide along capitals carved with vines and beasts, while pilgrims murmur prayers at the lattice of St. Martin's relics. Near the donation box you see a stone lip with a hair's breadth of wobble, the sort of looseness that comes from being pried and returned without the mortar's true bite, and you kneel as if to pray. Behind it lies a wrapped bundle, a narrow-bladed weapon folded in cloth that smells of horse, and the sweet, blunt scent of tallow, as if it rode in a saddlebag near a greased harness. The blade is the length of a man's hand to the wrist and thin, the style of a rondel or bollock dagger that travellers favour because it slips into a boot or belt unseen, and you know that knives and eating daggers are everyday tools in this century, so mere possession is not proof. You cover it again and let your breath move with the candles, because the crypt is watched, and the canons who keep vigil are patient with those who sit long without speaking. You ask the prior, with courtesy and measured words, for permission to inspect the satchels kept in the guesthouse cloakroom, offering to do so under his eye and without breaking any man's property. He grants it, understanding that an innocent traveller seeks not to pry, but to preserve order, and the lay brother fetches the bundles while the prior holds a lamp low. Your fingers travel the seams lightly, mapping the ridge where a lining has been lifted, catching the subtle shift where reinforcement stitches change rhythm, and in one bag you find it. A narrow band that runs along the back panel, pliant yet firm, as if parchment sleeps inside. You do not open it. Instead, you press gently until the bag yields a whisper of cords beneath cloth, the twist of silk rather than the scratch of hemp, and a small, hard disc where wax has set like a pebble. Through a pinhole at a seam end, nothing you made, simply a careless bite left by haste, you glimpse a flush of deep red, the sort used by cardinals and royal notaries, and you catch the ghost of an impression, a cross and a device that resembles a shield. The prior, practised in such matters, nods at once. A chancery style, likely headed for Avignon or its servants, the sort sent during truces to confirm terms or request judgments, and a counterseal pressed to guard the first. You both step back from the satchel as if from an altar, because to break that stitching without cause would wound more than cloth. It would harm the trust that keeps blood from roads. When you leave the cloakroom, the false monk drifts toward the outer door, trying to fold himself into the tide of travellers, and you let him go. You note the scar that tucks into his jawline, the stiff set of his left shoulder, the wide, easy stride of a man who once marched with a pack and spear. You note the courier's habit of standing with his back near a wall and his gaze flicking to every latch. You do not confront either man, because a quarrel would bring soldiers and the bailiff, and in a town on edge, an English pilgrim with a dagger found near a shrine is a convenient culprit. Instead, you return to the prior with what you have learned, and you ask him to send the letters onward under ecclesiastical seal, the way that canons sometimes shelter messages too dangerous to appear in a market bag. The prior agrees, speaking of witnesses and cords and how a new seal affixed for safe conduct can ride alongside an old one without displacing it, and he promises to place the satchel in the sacristy until a trusted canon sets out. You feel the risk like a cool draught. If you unmask spies in public, you become one by the naming, and if you shout too loudly, the truce turns brittle in your mouth. So you choose the quiet solution, leaving the canons to their ledgers and lamps, and you step back into the nave where bells soften the afternoon, knowing that sometimes the gentlest path is the one that keeps swords sheathed and vows unbroken. You choose the quietest path and bring the satchel and the dagger to the prior's chamber, where a single candle paints the ink-stained table in a soft circle of light. You keep your report measured, where you found the blade in the crypt wall's cleft, how the satchel's seam opened to reveal folded packets already sealed with other hands, and why unmasking the false pilgrims in the guesthouse would draw soldiers and stir the truce into anger. You speak of the nobleman's route, and the way he travelled in ordinary clothes, yet kept to the safer hostelries, the habit of men who carry more than prayers. You add what innkeepers and friars whispered, that riders from both banners mingle with penitents, using badges and shells as a cloak for letters. You ask not for absolution, but for a lawful path that does not snap the thin cord of peace. You place the dagger on the table as a confessed burden you will not carry further, and you set the satchel beside it as a trust for the church. You fall silent, letting the prior read your face as he would a manuscript margin, looking for erasures and corrections. The prior answers with procedure rather than alarm, and his calm steadies your breath. He draws out a wooden box where wax cakes and a metal seal rest, along with a small book of earlier impressions pressed into wax, proofs of the house's emblem used to counter forgery. He studies the external seals on the nobleman's packets without breaking them, noting device and legend, comparing them to examples he keeps for memory's sake. A hunting horn here, a stylized lily there, marks associated with magnates of Aquitaine or agents known to pass through Tours. He explains that letters which are already sealed need not be opened to be forwarded under ecclesiastical seal. They can be wrapped inside a new cover, the abbey's seal affixed on a parchment tag so that lay officers see church custody has not disturbed another's seal. He says that such a cover functions as a safe conduct in practice because few bailiffs and fewer captains wish to answer for laying hands on a sealed packet of a religious house during a truce. He adds that if anyone doubts, the memorandum he will write will state when, where, and from whom the items passed into his hands, so the chain of care is plain. He turns the dagger so the worn leather of its grip faces up, and he nods once, as if taking responsibility for a sorrow that should no longer rest on a traveller. He composes the memorandum in Latin, his pen moving with slow patience across the page, naming the shrine, the guest house, the date by the feast day, and the form of each object entrusted. He describes the knife and the satchel, the presence of sealed letters within, and your request that the correspondence be conducted to Avignon without scandal to either side. He folds the memorandum, tucks it within a new wrapper of stout parchment, and melts wax over a strip that passes through the cover, pressing the house's seal until its impression dries round and whole. He says that this wrapper will travel as a cover to the already sealed letters inside. Should the papal couriers need to see the memorandum, they can break only the outer seal, leaving the original sender's seals intact. He speaks of the understanding, long practiced, that ecclesiastical seals demand respect even from laymen who might otherwise search a traveller, and that the curia recognizes such wrappers as proper transmission when circumstances require. He adds that the papal clerks in the Rhone Valley regularly register where letters originate and by what hands they come, so a note of this house's seal will help the chain of record. He dries the wax with a breath and sets the packet aside as gently as if it were a relic. He summons a lay brother who knows the southern road, a man used to mule lines and to speaking little, and gives him instructions as one passes a lamp from palm to palm. He is to leave before first light to the affiliated house that keeps the road beyond Poitiers, where a trusted cellarer can put the packet into the hands of a mounted servant, bound for a mendicant priory known to receive papal messengers. He reminds the brother that Avignon-bound traffic is steady even in uneasy years. Collectors for the apostolic camera, envoys with questions of ransoms and alliances, and nuncios returning reports of negotiations under truce. He notes that such men follow established relays, abbeys and friaries with guest masters trained to hold, register, and hand forward packets. So a sealed wrapper does not wander but moves like a pilgrim who always knows where the next bed lies. He adds that the lay brother's mule will carry nothing flashy, that clothes should be plain, and that no word of the dagger or of false pilgrims should pass his lips along the way. He trusts that in a day or two a papal courier will pass north to south through Tours, as they often do, and the wrapper can be delivered directly if Providence shortens the path. He gives the brother the blessing for travellers, and a small purse for fodder and tolls, and with that the road south has its next quiet guardian. The prior then asks you to sit while he goes to speak with the town's officer, and you wait with the steady sound of footsteps in the cloister below. When he returns, his report is spare and practical. The bailiff has no appetite to seize a packet sealed by this house, and would be relieved not to explain to garrison men why he stirred up a sacred place during a truce. He agrees that the dead nobleman's death will be recorded as unresolved for now, that your name will appear only as a questioned stranger, not as a condemned killer, and that the Church's assumption of custody removes the pretext to hold you further. He has reminded the officer that, by custom, pilgrims enjoy a measure of sanctuary within the precinct, and that mistreating them would travel faster than any courier to both courts' ears in these brittle months of negotiation. He says the bailiff understands jurisdiction like a ledger. If someone else can balance the entry without charging his office, he will let it pass. He adds that if soldiers want a show of authority, they can say the dagger was surrendered to the Church, and that the rest lies in higher hands, which satisfies both pride and prudence. He looks at you with the kind of mercy that does not excuse, but sees the path toward peace, and nods toward the crypt. You keep your vigil where St. Martin's resting place draws lamps of yellow light into the cool air, and the stone remembers more prayers than any one voice could carry. You lay a modest offering, a simple coin wrapped in a strip of cloth, beside other gifts, and think of the soldier's cloak cut in half, shared without fanfare, passed from hand to need. You understand why his emblem comforts men in divided years, charity that does not ask whose banner a man once followed, only whether he has come hungry from the road. You whisper a vow fulfilled, not as triumph, but as a task completed in the proper order, to deliver what should be delivered, to speak to whoever could act without breaking the truce, to leave vengeance to courts and to time. You ask that the false pilgrims find a judge wiser than anger, and that the dead man's letters do more good than harm within the papal registers. You rise when the candles burn low, and the silence feels like a cloak around your shoulders. You step back into the cloister, where the night thins toward morning. At dawn, the bells call prime in soft, measured strikes, and mist lies low along the Loire like breath held between phrases. You watch the lay brother lead his mule towards the south gate, a small figure that the fog soon hides, and you take up your staff as other travellers gather at the road. You pass beneath the towers without notice, just one more pilgrim with dust on your hem and a badge that asks no questions. You keep to the verge and let carts and mounted men go by, hearing only the creak of leather and the roll of wheels along damp earth. You do not carry letters or a blade or a name cleared in a clerk's book, but you do carry a vow kept, and that feels sufficient for a day when the weather holds and the road opens. You move on while, far south, clerks in Avignon ready their inks to mark the coming and going of messages that shape truces and treaties, cataloguing news with patient hands. You leave Tours with the quiet knowledge that the same roads that carry prayers carry letters, and that in years like these, a traveller's small, careful choices can weigh more than anyone will ever record. The road opens ahead like a long breath, and you move within it, quieter now, as if the earth itself were easing you along. Pilgrim paths have always done this, gathering footsteps into a patient rhythm, binding market towns to shrines, cloisters to river crossings, and all of it to the soft governance of bells. In the years when kings argue and banners snap in wet wind, these paths keep another time. They belong to sandals and mule carts, to tinsmiths and bead sellers, to friars in patched brown wool. They belong to you. Along them, the land remembers peace, even when peace must be borrowed for a season. Somewhere south, the papal court at Avignon weighs news and rumour with the same measured caution it uses for canon law. Cardinals confer beneath painted vaults, clerks tally rents and tithes, and legates ride outward, seeking that careful stitch that holds a wound together. In such a world, a sealed letter is more than wax and ribbon. It is breath held, a promise to be opened by the right hands, at the right desk, so that words may act as bridges and not as flints. The Church has long known this, that messages can heal if they arrive gently and in order. So roads carry more than travellers. They carry attempts at understanding. Shrines have their own language for that understanding. At Tours, people come to St. Martin for his old, simple hospitality. A cloak halved on a cold night, a soldier laying down a sword, charity without a trumpet. Over centuries, confraternities have built bridges and hostels in his name, shaping shelter out of piety so mendicants and merchants could pass. Badges glint at throats and hats, little tokens stamped in tin to say, I went, I prayed, I was reminded. A practice of movement becomes a schooling in slowness. You learn the honest weights of bread, of water, of rain, and of silence. Espionage slips between these customs like an eel in reeds. Yet even that shadowed traffic acknowledges the way sanctuaries work. Within cloisters, letters change hands under seals older than any captain's commission. A prior's promise rides further than a mailed escort sometimes can. It is not that the world is naive, only that it knows the patience of archives, the value of a record kept safe. In the measured gloom of a scriptorium, ink dries, wax cools, and intent takes on a form that survives storms. You walk, and the truce feels like morning fog, thin, silver, and tender on the hedges. Farmers lift their heads at the field's edges. A mill turns, its wheel dripping. A lark goes up, inconsequential as a blessing. The mud on your shoes makes a soft music with each step, a metronome to the day. It is enough. Your vow has taught you what vows often teach, to be faithful to a direction until it becomes a place. to keep stillness like a coin in your pocket, to trust that the world can be mended in small pieces by humble hands if they are steady. Beyond the next bend there will be an inn, or only a tree and a trickle of clear water. In either case, you know what to do. You set down your bundle, you rest your feet, you speak little and listen for the hour. You let the road become a kindly companion, content to go with you as far as you need. The bells will find you wherever you are, drawing a circle of time that is safe to sleep inside. The letters are travelling by their proper way now, and you are travelling by yours. The light thins, the fields give off their cool breath. You soften your eyes and let the horizon blur, like ink in a shallow dish. In this mild hush, where even the crows seem drowsy, your thoughts grow simple and unclenched. The path is clear enough for morning. For now, there is only the quiet, and your warm, even breath, and the long, forgiving road that receives you and keeps you and carries you gently onward into rest.